My daughter-in-law banned me from eating in my own home, and my son took her side. But what they didn't know, I had already put one clause in place that could take the entire house back. And the day she hid my medication, I activated it. "Perhaps you should relearn the rules," Martha Greta said, her voice as polished and cold as the designer tray in her hand. I froze, my grandmother's hand-painted porcelain plate still gripped in my fingers. It was exactly 6:05 p.m. in my historic home in Heidelberg. 2 years ago, I had signed the deed over to my son Christian, but I wasn't powerless. I had retained a life estate and a reversionary clause for cases of gross ingratitude. Legally, I was no longer the title owner, but I was the protected fortress. Greta, a newcomer to this family, had mistaken my kindness for a total surrender of my territory. She had printed a list, laminated naturally. Point 1 of our new house rules. Dinner is served at exactly 6 p.m. Anyone late disrupts the family structure and must wait until the working professionals have finished. I felt a surge of heat, but I kept my face like stone. I looked at the massive oak table in the kitchen I had renovated with 30,000 euros of my own savings. Greta was treating my sanctuary like her corporate playground. She didn't realize she was playing with fire. "Rules are a fascinating concept, Greta," I replied, my voice a razor-sharp whisper. I placed the plate on the stone counter with a deliberate, bone-chilling click. "Especially rules made in a house where the gift can be legally revoked for disrespect. Tell me, have you actually read the fine print of the deed? Or are you just winging this dictatorship?" Christian finally looked up, his eyes darting between us. "Mom, please don't start. Greta's right. We need structure. You've been losing track of time lately." I stared at my only son. I had worked 2 jobs to put him through university, and now he was just a hollow echo for his wife's arrogance. I didn't sit down. I walked to the window and looked at the old apple tree. "Order is important," I said softly, but with a weight that silenced the room. "But respect is the foundation. Since you've decided I'm a second-class guest here, I'll have to activate my own protections." I walked out without a bite. The hunger in my stomach was nothing compared to the hunger for justice. The night was a long, cold stretch of silence. I lay awake hearing their muffled laughter from the living room. They were watching a movie, blissfully unaware that I was mourning the loss of my home. When I transferred the house to Christian, I envisioned grandkids and safety. Instead, I got an ice-cold tyrant who moved my photos and repotted my flowers as if to erase my existence. Greta felt invincible, believing the house was hers. She didn't know about my insurance policy against moral decay. The next morning, a yellow sticky note was plastered on the fridge. "Martha, only run the dishwasher when full. We need to be eco-conscious. Greta." I didn't get angry. I took the note, crumpled it into a ball, and dropped it into the bin. I brewed a strong coffee and pulled a thick green file from my safe. Before breakfast, I called Klaus Weber, my oldest friend and a ruthless attorney. Klaus had been quietly drafting a revocation of gift notice for weeks, ever since I first mentioned Greta's subtle bullying. "Klaus, the hammer drops today," I said firmly. "It's become unbearable." His voice was professional and steady. "I have the lawsuit ready, Martha. To prove gross ingratitude in a German court, we need a pattern of exclusion. We need to show they are violating your residency rights." I hung up and felt a surge of electricity in my veins. I went into the garden and began pruning the roses with a vengeance. When Greta threw open the window and yelled that the noise was ruining her Zoom meeting, I didn't even blink. "This is my garden, Greta. I've tended it for 40 years, I shouted back, my voice echoing off the stone walls. "As long as I have my residency rights, I decide when the roses get cut. If you want silence, buy earplugs." I saw her yank the curtain shut in a rage. The game for control had officially started. Justice isn't a gift. It's something you take back with the law on your side. My plan was moving, and Klaus was ready to ensure that the house and my dignity remained mine. By noon, Christian was standing in the garden looking nervous in his expensive suit. Mom Greta is a wreck. Her career project is on the line, and you're making things impossible. I put down the shears and wiped my hands on my apron, refusing to give him eye contact. Christian, my project is called Dignity. It's a full-time job. He groaned. Enough with the drama. It's just a few house rules. He truly didn't get it. He was blinded by his own comfort. I stepped into his personal space. It's not about rules. It's about your wife forbidding me from eating at my own table while you sat there like a coward. He looked at his shoes. She doesn't mean it that way. The house will be ours anyway once the holding periods pass. I smiled, and it wasn't a kind one. You're wrong. I remain the controlling party through my legal protections. If this toxic environment continues, I will revoke the gift for gross ingratitude. Klaus already has the paperwork. I led him inside and yanked open the oak cabinets. Your grandmother's silver, the Bohemian crystal. Greta called this clutter. I've decided to have it all appraised and sold next week. I need the cash for my own freedom. Christian's face went pale. You can't. We've already used the house's value as collateral for our new SUV loan. Our financial plan depends on this property. He had finally admitted it. They weren't just living here. They were using me as a bank. Your financial plans don't mean a thing to me when my honor is being trampled, I said, turning my back on him. You wanted new rules. Here's the big one. I am the legally protected resident, and you are guests who are overstaying their welcome. I left him standing in the kitchen, stunned. The power was shifting. Christian was beginning to realize that Greta's arrogance was a luxury they could no longer afford. For the first time in years, I felt like the master of my domain. On Tuesday afternoon, the mask finally slipped. Christian came home early, slipping into the hallway unnoticed. He watched through the door as Greta walked into the kitchen with a smug grin. I was sorting my heart medication for the week. With a quick, mocking move, she snatched the pill box and shoved it onto the highest shelf of the cabinet, a place I couldn't reach without a ladder. Let's keep the counters tidy, Martha, she sneered. Learn to put your clutter away. I stood there, my hands trembling with a mix of shock and fear. I needed those pills. Greta just turned her back and started the espresso machine. Suddenly, Christian stepped out of the shadows. His face was a mask of pure fury. What the hell are you doing, Greta? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. Greta jumped, nearly dropping her cup. I'm just cleaning up Christian. Your mother is so disorganized. Those are her heart meds, you idiot, he roared. He reached up, grabbed the box, and handed it to me with shaking hands. He looked at me as his mother, not an obstacle. He saw the fear I'd been hiding. I'm so sorry, Mom, he whispered, squeezing my hand. I was blind. I was so damn blind. He turned to Greta, who was shrinking against the counter. Not another word. I thought you were just a neat freak, but this is cruel. This is dangerous. He turned back to me, his eyes clear for the first time in months. What do we need to do? Mom, how do we fix this shame? I took a deep breath. My son was finally back. We have to change the legal structure of this house. Christian, we need a complete structural and legal separation so we stop poisoning each other. Greta stood there as her house of cards collapsed. Justice didn't need a judge today. It just needed the truth to step into the light. The fight wasn't over, but I wasn't fighting alone anymore. Greta had crossed a line she couldn't walk back from. Klaus Weber didn't waste time. After weeks of intense pressure and legal threats, he called us all to his office. The room smelled of old paper and expensive suits. Martha has the grounds to revoke the entire gift, Klaus said, dropping a heavy file on the desk. Obstruction of medical care is a serious violation of her residency rights. Greta's lawyer whispered in her ear, shaking his head. She looked like she wanted to scream, but she was trapped. We are proposing a binding settlement, Klaus continued. The house will be structurally divided into two independent units. The ground floor and garden return to Martha's sole control with a corrected entry in the land registry. The upper floor will be rented to Christian and Greta at a market rate. This rent will fund Martha's future care. Christian signed immediately. He was desperate to make amends. Greta signed with a shaking hand, her eyes burning with resentment. Her lifestyle was built on my generosity, and now that tap was being metered. "This is blackmail," she hissed as we left. I looked at her, my voice steady and cold. "No, Greta, this is the consequence of your choices. You wanted rules. These are the real ones. They're based on the law, not your ego." Greta's firm had recently started an ethics investigation into her department, and rumors were swirling that her hostile environment at home had leaked into her professional life. She was losing her grip on everything. I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. In Germany, justice often means drawing ironclad lines where respect has failed. Christian held the door for me, a small gesture of a son returning home. Greta followed behind a tenant in a house she used to think she owned. The balance of power was restored. I was the master of my fate once again. The road to peace would be long, but the foundation was finally solid and legal. The renovation began a few weeks later. The house was a chaos of dust and hammers, but to me, it was the sound of a symphony. Craftsmen tore down walls to create a separate entrance for the upper floor. Greta had to watch from the sidelines as her territory shrank every single day. She was now officially just a tenant in a building she had treated like her personal kingdom. The legal security gave me the energy to enjoy my life again. I wasn't a prisoner anymore. I installed a smart video doorbell at my new entrance. It was perfectly legal, and it meant Greta couldn't touch my mail or monitor my visitors. She knew Klaus was waiting for one more slip-up to evict her. Christian started helping me with dinner again, away from Greta's watchful, judgmental eyes. He seemed lighter, as if a spell had been broken. We talked about things other than house rules and property values. "I didn't realize how much she was gaslighting me, Mom," he admitted one evening over a glass of wine. "She kept telling me you were losing your mind, that you needed management. She made me think I was protecting you by letting her take over." I squeezed his hand. She wanted me weak so she could feel powerful, Christian. But she forgot that I built this house from the ground up. We sat in my kitchen, which was finally mine again. The dust of the construction eventually settled, revealing a new, healthy boundary for our family. Justice is often a loud, messy process, but it leads to a house where everyone knows their place. I looked at the new locks on my doors and felt a peace I hadn't known in years. I had reclaimed my kingdom, and my son had reclaimed his soul. Greta was just a neighbor now, and that was exactly how it needed to be. As the walls went up, Greta's world began to shrink. Her superficial friends stopped calling. They had no interest in a construction zone or a friend who no longer had a mansion to host parties in. Christian spent his weekends in the garden with me or looking through old albums. Greta sat upstairs for hours staring at her laptop in a silent, bitter rage. The power she'd wielded through her laminated lists was gone, replaced by a rent invoice she had to pay every month. One afternoon, she tried to use faked tears. She found me in the garden and started sobbing. "Martha, can't. We just moved past this. I was just stressed with work." I didn't mean for things to get this far. I stopped the hose and looked at her. Her regret was as shallow as a puddle. "Stress doesn't make you hide a woman's heart medication, Greta. You tried to erase me from my own life. You don't get to move past that with a few tears." I told her plainly that respect isn't a faucet you can turn on when you're thirsty. "We are neighbors now, Greta. We will be polite in the hallway, but we will never be a family. That is the price of your cruelty." She cried harder, but I felt nothing. I had learned that justice means protecting your heart from people who only value you when they need something. When she walked away, I felt a deep, quiet certainty. I had defended my peace. The garden was blooming, and inside me, it was finally spring. Christian came out with a jacket for me, and we stood together in the evening air. The house wasn't just a building anymore. It was a monument to my victory over humiliation. I was no longer the victim. I was the survivor who had won. Finally, the work was finished. The house had 2 distinct bell signs, one for Martha Schmidt and one for Christian and Greta. It was a physical manifestation of our separate lives. The land registry had been updated after months of bureaucratic waiting, and the ground floor was legally mine again. Christian and Greta now transferred their rent to my account on the 1st of every month. It was a fair, market-based solution that everyone had to accept. I invited my friend Helga over for a small housewarming. We sat in my living room, which was filled with my old furniture and none of Greta's cold, minimalist decor. "You did it," Martha Helga said, smiling over her tea. "You fought for your life." I nodded. I just insisted on my rights. Many women my age give up because they're afraid of losing their children, but you can't have love without respect. I had to teach them that. Christian came down later with a bouquet of lilies. He looked happy, free from the constant tension Greta used to create. The structural separation had actually saved his marriage for the moment because Greta could no longer use me as a scapegoat for her unhappiness. She stayed behind her door, keeping to the boundaries we'd set. When we met in the hall, it was a polite good morning and nothing more. It was perfect. Justice doesn't always mean a big hug and an apology. Often it just means a peaceful coexistence under the law. The house felt like mine again, and I breathed deeply for the first time in years. The legal lines had stopped the constant fighting. It was a peace built on reality, not on the lie that everything was fine. I looked around my home and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. I was the master of my house once more. With my legal security back, I started living again. I joined a dance class and traveled with my friends. The rental income gave me a financial freedom I hadn't expected. I wasn't the old mother anymore. I was an independent woman who owned her future. The neighbors noticed the change and treated me with a new level of respect. Greta, however, was struggling. Her firm had passed her over for a major promotion because of her interpersonal issues, and she was no longer the rising star she thought she was. Christian told me she had started therapy. "She's realizing her need for control is a sickness," he said. I was glad for him, but I kept my distance. I had learned that trust is a fragile thing, and once it's shattered, it never quite holds the same weight. I was proud of Christian for standing his ground. Our relationship was mature, honest, and built on the truth of what had happened. One afternoon, I sat on my terrace watching the birds. I thought about the night Greta tried to re-educate me. That humiliation had been the spark I needed. Without her arrogance, I might have stayed quiet and let them slowly push me out. In a strange way, she was the architect of my new freedom. She forced me to find my strength. Justice has a funny way of leading you to happiness through a storm. I closed my eyes and enjoyed the silence of my home. It belonged to me spiritually, emotionally, and legally. I had learned that you have to stand up for your dignity, no matter your age. The sun was warm on my face, and I felt ready for whatever came next. Life had given me a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste a second of it. I celebrated my 70th birthday with a party in the garden. All my friends were there, and Klaus Weber toasted to my health. Christian was at the grill laughing and joking like the boy I remembered. And Greta. She was there too. She stayed in the background, helping politely, and keeping her opinions to herself. She had learned her lesson. She was a guest in my life now, not the manager of it. There was a sense of hard-earned respect in the air. I stood back for a moment and watched the scene. I thought about the version of me from a year ago, the woman who almost gave up. I had chosen the hard path of resistance, and it had paid off. I had fought for my dignity with the power of the law and a heart that refused to be broken. I wasn't just a survivor. I was a victor. In Germany, justice is often quiet and steady, but it's real. I raised my glass to the stars. To life, I whispered. And to the only rules that matter, love, respect, and the law. Christian came over and put his arm around me. Happy birthday, Mom. You're the strongest woman I know. I looked into his eyes and knew we were okay. The justice I had sought wasn't just about a house. It was about the truth. I had secured my legacy and regained my son. The house was a place of joy again. As the music started and we began to dance, I knew this was the best day of my life. Everything was settled on my terms. I looked up at the old apple tree and smiled. I was finally home, truly, legally, and forever. Justice had been served, and it tasted like freedom. Sometimes it's not about winning. It's about knowing when to stop accepting what slowly takes you apart. You don't always need to raise your voice, just know where your line is and what you're willing to protect.